Greetings and welcome, everybody, to this episode of Poly Weekly News. I'm your host, David Danto, and today we're moving a little bit north of my border here. I have my colleagues on from Canada. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about what they do and what the cultural differences might be like up there as opposed to down here in the U.S. and the rest of the world. So, Jeff, let me start with you. Jeff Garrett, introduce yourself to everybody. Tell everyone who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yeah, Jeff Garrett. So I'm the, I guess you could say, business leader for Poly HP in Canada. So I manage the entire Poly business from enterprise, SMB, service provider, government, federal and provincial, municipal, all sectors, and have a team working with me, such as my colleague Chris here. I'll turn it over to him.
Chris, your turn.
Okay, thank you. So I'm the sales practice lead for the Canadian federal government and large accounts, enterprise accounts in Atlantic Canada for HB Hybrid Work Solutions and Peripherals. I got to get that right, formerly Poly. So we work with the Canadian federal government and its agencies to make sure that they have an optimized hybrid work experience.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me today. The thought of doing this particular episode came from Chris. I was just with you up in Ottawa, and I know it was my first chance to travel back to Canada in 3 years of a pandemic, and that's just a really long time because it's such a short trip for me. It's a half-hour flight, and I like going off. And I know enough about Canada that I don't say Starbucks, I say Tim Hortons, and I know that Toronto is 2 syllables, not 3 syllables, because I have relatives that live there. But culturally, does it track the same as EMEA or as the USA? Jeff, I'll be asking you, like, is the hybrid work, is the inside versus outside adoption, is the use of technology and tools, is it the same, or are there nuances that we're not aware of?
Yeah, so I would say it is similar, but not the exact same, right? So there's obviously a lot of similarities between ourselves and our American neighbors, but there's definitely nuances, right? I think you use that term, nuances. So we tend to be, maybe you say, a little bit more conservative here. Oftentimes, for example, new technology might be adopted a little bit quicker in the US. Find that in Canada, we tend to be a little bit more, as I would say, conservative, a little bit more cautious to adopt new things. But definitely I would say there's more similarities than differences. But though probably the closer you work with us, the more you would start to see those different nuances culturally. Chris, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Well, I agree with everything you said, other than we're known to be very polite. So, and I apologize if I'm saying that too many times today.
Well, Chris, I was just with you for a trade show, a little conference, one-day event that covered the public sector, and it was interesting to me because that the people in the public sector in Canada are going through the same challenge that everybody else in the world are going through, where organizations want their employees back in the office. And a lot of people are resisting that. They've gotten more used to this hybrid and flexible work. Tell us a little bit about what that was like and what organizations are dealing with.
Sure. So we work very closely with all the federal government agencies and a lot of enterprise accounts in Atlantic Canada, but I'll focus on the federal government for now. The hybrid approach up until recently was somewhat varied by agency. There was a lot of latitude with government leadership teams. And I'd say, for the most part, a pretty flexible remote work policy. Now, what had changed just actually back in December, the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat, and it's a government agency that has a mandate for financial oversight, and essentially they are the government's purse strings. They really hold accountability for financial governance across different agencies. So back in December, they came out with a very strong suggestion of a 2 to 3 days back at the office type work policy. So I think since then, we're seeing a much greater standardization of policies across agencies. It's also helping to develop standards across different collaboration and meeting spaces. So we've been working with organizations like Shared Services Canada. They are the predominant IT support and procurement arm of the Canadian federal government to really develop standards across all of their meeting spaces. And it's predominantly a Microsoft Teams room experience across the board. So we're very, very closely with Microsoft and the federal government as well.
Yeah, and I think from when I was up there and having the conversations with the people that attended, the struggle is the same. A lot of people were hired during the pandemic that can't possibly all get into an office because they're dispersed. And Jeff, you would have to agree and correct me if I'm wrong. Canada, talking about Canada like it's one thing is a mistake. Canada's enormous. with different areas of concentration and different cities. I mean, I've, just personally, the Vancouver, Calgary, all the things in local to me, Toronto and the rest of Ontario. I mean, it's not just one culture; it's a lot of different aspects, and trying to get people to go back to one office may be difficult.
Yeah, one of the things I always joke about with Americans, David, is when they talk about coming here, they usually don't talk about a city. They usually talk about us as one entity, right? So, for example, oftentimes someone will say, "I'm coming up to Canada," and I always joke, like I might say, "I'm going to New York City," or "I'm going to Las Vegas." I'm not going to say, "I'm going to the United States of America," but we certainly are regional, obviously, big country, lots of different markets, lots of different centers, and they all have their own unique return to office and obviously the unique dynamics. We found that the return to office here has been slower than some may have anticipated, but it's been very gradual, and I found that it's really started to pick up momentum, especially in the last, I would say, 3 months. The momentum for back to office is starting to really pick up. But again, per segment, Chris mentioned the federal government. That's a fairly substantial mandate, probably the most significant mandate within the country. A lot of the large industries, banking, et cetera, are not being quite as bold as that. So that one is one that's had some ripple effects within the market. But I think that the government sets the tone for the country once they start to roll people back. Other industries are likely going to take note of that, maybe not necessarily follow suit right away, but in due time, I think that it's a good indicator of what's coming.
And I know one of the points that Poly HP is making is that we're not returning to the office the way it was. There's been so much technology advancement and such a different change of purpose for offices that we're really suggesting to our clients and our customers and our partners that office needs to be redesigned and redeveloped to meet the needs of today, which are very different than they were the needs of 3 years ago.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 100% agree. I was at client sites today, different agencies, Canadian federal government agencies, and the amount of sheer work that has to be done. Nobody's been in the office for 2 years, so a lot of the equipment is outdated. To try to have an equitable meeting experience for both virtual and in-person attendees, there's a lot of work to be done. So there's a lot of effort into that, a lot of standardization. We're working really closely, and essentially, I think, David, and your comments at the event there a couple of weeks ago were bang on in your keynote presentation. We're not going back to the same office. We need to redefine what that office looks like, and basically work around that to looking at more of a. I think one of your phrases that you coined that I've used since was looking at being a magnet, not a mandate. Right? Let's bring people back to the office because they want to come to the office for the right reasons.
And I'll admit that I'm the one who stole that as well. I'm not sure who originated it, but it is the point that we want to get people to like this. To change gears just for a little bit, Jeff, I'll ask you, because I want to give credit where credit is due. When the horrific COVID-19 pandemic hit us 3 years ago, for the most part, America discovered telehealth. There had been a little bit of it before. In some areas, California was a little bit ahead of the West Coast, a little bit ahead of the rest of the country. But we're a very litigious country here, and there was a lot of avoidance of telehealth. And then we learned that doctors are more afraid of the coronavirus than they were of being sued. But for years and years prior to this pandemic, Canada was a leader in telehealth services because of how dispersed the physical geography was. It's hard to get to a medical office when needed. So I'm assuming that that's one of the things that we're supporting as well, that it's a very robust telehealth and telemedicine services within Canada.
Yeah, and I admit I don't know as much about the U.S. system, but from a Canadian perspective, certainly we've been very much leading in telehealth. So I've been here for 20 years, coming up on 20 years, Polycom, and telehealth has always been a major market for us. So we have some very large telehealth customers. Alberta, out in the Maritimes, Ontario as well has got a very robust telehealth program. And really a lot of the applications for those are serving remote communities. So you think of the size of our country and the population. We have obviously a large population sort of in the southern part, right near the U.S. border. And if you think of from a healthcare perspective, those folks are fairly easy to to service because they're in major centers, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, et cetera. But the outliers, those who are in more remote communities, remain more of a challenge. But with our healthcare system, everyone is really entitled to equal access to healthcare. So I've been up to some of our customers in, say, northern parts of Ontario, where they're using our equipment, telehealth equipment, to have consultations with doctors who are down in Toronto at, say, University Health Network or some of the big hospitals in Southern Ontario. Having whether it's a doctor assessing them, or they're trying to determine whether or not they need to fly them into another center. So that's been happening pre-pandemic, right? So we've been doing that for many, many years. I think what the pandemic did, much like what you're talking about in the US, it really highlighted the importance of a healthy and robust telehealth network, and almost made the average Canadian realize, hey, we all need to invest more money into this.
Oh, absolutely. And we found that a lot of people would save time and energy by not going to a medical center when they had a choice to. But you're referring to decades of people that can't get to a medical center. I mean, from I understand, I've heard stories of some of the Indigenous people that you literally can't get to half the year because the roads are impassable and the able to, Canada definitely was a pioneer in some of this. And to understand that we've gone a long way is definitely something to be proud of, something that your community should be boasting about.
Yeah, certainly, and I've been to some of those communities, and in my case, it was in Northern Ontario, where they're not able to get to those communities in a certain part of the year, so telehealth becomes critical. And the technology advancements that we've seen, especially in the last 5 or 6 years, have made a big difference to the quality of healthcare that we've been able to offer to some of those remote places.
That's terrific. So gentlemen, let me ask you what you're hearing from your customers, which may or may not be the same as what I'm hearing and what people around the world are hearing. What are the biggest pain points that people are telling you about as we're dealing with this return to the office, with hybrid work, with remote? What are the problems that you're being asked to solve? Chris, I guess I'll start with you, and then Jeff, will you chime in as well?
I think from a federal government perspective, certainly they have high standards on aspects like security and accessibility, but really demanding levels of support as well. So we need to make sure we do a good job supporting them where they need to be supported. And a lot of that, it's making things easier and better. And how would I define that? How we design our systems, how we put things together, and how we leverage tools to make room designs and a simpler, more holistic and inclusive hybrid experience. Commonality across different video experiences, like our Director AI portfolio provides. Having even audio experiences, like we've got acoustic innovations, noise block AI, acoustic fence, basically equating the home office environment with the boardroom or in office meeting room environment, and making sure you can adapt that to accommodate for different types of user styles, which we call personas, or different work style habits. I think that's really, really important across the board. And then the other aspect is making it easy to buy. Frankly, from a procurement perspective, you need to have easy vehicles, and you need to make it easy for them to understand and navigate through this very complex world of hybrid, where it's whether in the office or remote, so they can get the right solutions to outfit their employees to the best of their ability.
Jeff, what are you hearing from customers other than that? Any specific pain points or things that you think might be unique to your market, or not, or the same as everything else?
Yeah, so I agree with everything Chris said. Just to add to that, I guess one of the biggest, I think, challenges that I hear from customers is really attracting them back to the office. So they talk a lot about how they don't want to bring their employees back kicking and screaming, and this is where maybe the government might be a little bit different than the private sector, but they're trying to attract. They're trying to have the office be a magnet. And one of the challenges is that I think a lot of us have set up, like me, I've got my home office that I actually didn't have this pre-pandemic. I had a much more rudimentary office, but the pandemic almost forced me to say, hey, listen, I really need to get this out because I'm not on the road all the time. I'm not in the office like I used to be. So I've got multiple monitors. I've got a nice Poly P15 set up. I've got myself set up very well. So now when I go back into the office, I may not have that same experience. And the expectation is very high. So what I hear a lot of customers saying is, when our employees come in, sometimes they're underwhelmed by the technology. Chris mentioned before, upgrading boardrooms. So hey, we may have had boardroom video technology, but now that may not be up to the standards that we need to meet with employees. So those are challenges that I've heard from almost every single customer I've talked to is how do we attract them back in? Obviously, the technology is just one piece of it, right? So we're sort of a cog in the wheel. There's a lot of other aspects that customers have to address. But I think where we can play a valuable role is having that technology, as Chris said, be user-friendly, give them an experience that is as good as or better than what they're getting at home. And that bar frankly is set pretty high.
Agreed. That's what we're hearing everywhere, but it's good to know that it's the same or similar as you pointed out there. Let me ask you a question about experimenting, trying, testing the equipment. We have a lot of staff around Canada. We have a lot of people that can go and visit and call on our customers there. We have one EBC, right, in Toronto?
That's right. Yeah, it's right downtown Toronto, and we find that is become almost more busy now than it was even pre-pandemic. Again, I think it just kind of speaks to the importance of this technology to our customers. So we have customers in there every week, booked fairly solid. We have the ability to show different solutions. So we can show Microsoft Teams, we can show Zoom, we can show interoperability from telephony, headsets, video, etc. We have it hit it out pretty well. And the other nice thing about that, David, is we can also do those demos remote. So oftentimes we have customers who will say, hey, listen, and we really developed this during the pandemic. They say, I can't come into your office down at King and York, but I can dial in remotely. So we'll oftentimes either do it remote, or we'll have, the Toronto-based employees will come in, and then we can bring in somebody from Winnipeg or somebody from Vancouver, and they can have that sort of remote experience, which is we find is pretty effective.
Yeah, the poly experience centers are beautiful. The PECs we have all over the place. And I've been telling my viewers for forever that they should definitely make the time either to go in person or schedule a remote demo so that they can really see and hear how this technology works. It really makes the difference. So it's good to know that we have one in Canada as well. Gentlemen, I really appreciate you taking the time for kind of filling us in on this. I'll ask you before we go, Chris, if someone wants to reach out to you, learn a little bit about the area you cover, the federal space, reach out to you personally, ask you a question, how would they do that?
Chris.Nantes@hp.com is easy way. You can certainly find me. I'm very easily found in the federal government these days, and people get a hold of me quite quickly. We've got fiscal year end upon us. If there are things you need help with, especially in fiscal year end, which is March 31st, the clock is ticking, and my phone's been ringing off the hook. So we're here to help. We've got a very healthy supply chain situation right now, probably the best in the market right now. So, which we're very blessed and proud to have, and modestly speaking. So, happy to help in any way we can. We do a number of proof of concepts. I had 2 of them on the go today. We do proof of concepts because federal government likes to kick the tires. They need to test this stuff out.
Yeah, everybody does.
Of course, and they need a lot of security implications as well. So we need to make sure that we're there to support them, and we are. So please reach out. Happy to help.
And Chris, what city is home?
Ottawa. Well, that's a tough one. I'm from Atlantic, Canada. I'm from Cole Harbour, Nova Scotia, home of Sid the Kid and Nathan McKinnon for the hockey aficionados out there. But home is Ottawa right now.
Okay, we'll use Ottawa in your lower third title, no problem. Jeff, I'll ask you the same question. If somebody wanted to reach out to you, get more information about all of what we do in Canada or any specific product information in the region, how would they reach out to you?
Sure. So Jeff.Garrett, which is GARRATT at HP.com, but also on LinkedIn as well. And I'm based in the Toronto area, and we have a great team. So Chris is on my team in Ottawa there for representing federal government, but we have a team across the country. So if you're not in Toronto, let's say you're in Vancouver or Calgary or somewhere, we have team members there. I'd love to connect to you and make sure that you're well taken care of.
I appreciate that, and we'll put Toronto. And I'm one of the few honorary people from Toronto. I know it's 2 syllables. I have relatives up there. I've been there many times. So, gentlemen, Chris, Jeff, thank you very much for joining me. That's it for this week's edition of Poly Weekly News. Next week, we're going to have a preview of what Poly will be showing at Enterprise Connect this year. I'll be on with a number of my colleagues, and we'll be talking through what you can expect to see if you join us at Enterprise Connect. But for now, for all of my colleagues at Poly and HP, thank you very much for joining us. We really do appreciate you spending the time with us here every week, and we'll see you next week.